Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this morning. We're going to wait for a couple minutes while participants enter into the webinar, and then we'll get started. Morning, everyone. We're just waiting for folks to get connected into the webinar, and then we're going to get started in a few seconds here. Okay, great. I think we're leveled off. Kate, if you want to kick off our morning.
Thanks, John. And I'll just double check that you can hear me okay. Perfect. So good morning, everybody. I'm Kate Rich, and I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Policy Division within our newly renamed Department of Alberta Environment and Protected Areas. And I'm really pleased to join you this morning to open the webinar session. The policy division in Alberta Environment and Protected Areas includes many climate change related accountabilities. That includes the climate change policy team that leads initiatives like the review and update to the tier or technology innovation and emission reduction regulation system. There's also the climate systems team that leads oversight of items like the tier fund administration and climate change adaptation. And there's the Climate Regulation and Carbon Markets branch, which leads regulatory delivery of our many climate policy frameworks. And it's the Climate Regulation and Carbon Markets branch that's here today. It's headed by John Story-Bischoff, who introduced you to the webinar. And he and several members of his branch are on the webinar today. One of the functions of that branch is the administration of the tier regulation, including carbon pricing for aggregate conventional oil and gas facilities. And a purpose of the tier regulatory system is to apply that incentive to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while protecting the competitiveness of our emissions intensive and trade exposed sectors like the conventional oil and gas sector from the full cost of a carbon tax. The benefit of this seems to be very clearly well understood by you, the industry participants, as we had just shy of 240 aggregate facilities covered under tier for the 2021 compliance year. And that represents about 50,000 individual oil and gas sites. So I think its introduction and inclusion in tier was very welcome. I would also like to welcome our presenters today from the federal government. From the Canada Revenue Agency, we are joined by William Ferguson. And from Environment and Climate Change Canada, we have Nancy Klenovic on the line today. This is the third year the Government of Alberta and the Government of Canada have worked to present to you together and host one single session dealing with registration and fuel charge exemption. I know the availability of not only our provincial staff, but our CRA and our ECCC colleagues for these sessions is appreciated by our joint stakeholders. We understand the federal fuel charge and the provincial tier regulatory system may be new for many stakeholders, and we're happy to be able to present operational aspects of our programs and answer questions from you today to increase your awareness of our respective provincial and federal roles and how to navigate with us through the registration process. We would encourage you to reach out through the course of the year if you require any additional information on clarity or the rules in the provincial and federal systems. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our stakeholders for their participation in Alberta's tier regulatory system review engagement this summer. I know many of you participated in that, and we've been working with the federal government as well as across Government of Alberta departments to look at updates to our tier regulation, and we do expect to make changes before the end of 2022 that would be in place for the 2023 to 2030 period. As you know, a premise of our engagement and all signals continue to show that Alberta plans to continue industrial carbon pricing as we initiated in 2007, and that we will maintain tier throughout that period to 2023. In addition to the tier regulation review that occurred in 2022, some of you may be aware that we are conducting a review also this year of the methane policy framework in Alberta. And it's a two-phased engagement process, slightly different than how we undertook our tier review, where we have started with a working group with expertise from industry, from academia, from ENGOs, and from governments and the like. And there will be a second phase upon completion of that working group's advice and analysis and recommendations to us that will be for broader stakeholder and public engagement. So maybe a heads up that is also coming your way. I think there will be great interest from the oil and gas sector. And just before I turn it to John Sray Bischoff, again, our Executive Director for the Climate Compliance and Carbon Markets Group, to provide an overview of today's agenda, I again just want to thank everyone for participating today, from the presenters to the participants of this webinar. I really believe these information sessions are an important part of our compliance promotion under the tier regulation, and we appreciate you taking the time in your day to receive these updates for effective registration. So I'll turn it back to John.
Great, thank you very much, Kate. Maybe we could move to the agenda slide, and I'll give a little bit of a overview of what we're going to cover today. First, a couple of logistical items. We're recording the seminar today with the intention that the Alberta portion, and likely only the Alberta portion, will get published on our website. So that's the purpose of the recording today. We have disabled the two-way audio for participants and the chat, with the intention that folks can use the question and answer function, which is built into the Zoom tool. So you should be able to find a Q&A button at the bottom of your window where you can post questions. We're going to try to get through as many questions as we can today, but in the various slide decks that we're going to be sharing, we'll also be providing our respective email Dropbox addresses. If you do have questions that aren't covered today, we would encourage you to follow up with us. The webinar will run approximately, I guess, 2 hours today, depending on how many questions we receive. The focus, again, is on the registration aspects of the programs and the operational pieces. We're going to try to keep the questions in that space. And so, if again, if you have a question that's deferred or it's kind of off topic, we'd certainly welcome you to drop us an email. We're going to have some. We're going to start with some. First couple of presentations will be from CRA and ECCC, and I think they give some excellent overview of the overall steps in the process for obtaining a fuel charge exemption. So those will be good. And then after those two sessions, we'll have some time kind of specifically set aside for question and answers on those two presentations. For TIER and Alberta, we're going to go through some specific topics, some focus on forms, things to watch out for in terms of completing your applications to us, and some summary of deadlines. And then after that, we're going to have essentially an overall Q&A, so another opportunity to ask questions either on the Alberta section of the presentation, or anything that's come up or come to mind about the prior two presentations. So that's a bit of an overview of the course of the day. Well, maybe while you're looking, we'll move on, and we can like, if you see something there, you can always type an answer to that question. So let's maybe move on to the next part of the the set of presentations. I think Dragon's going to present some of the aspects of the tier registration, and then we'll use the remainder of the time till 11 o'clock to circle back on additional questions that we might be able to cover. Thank you. Go ahead, Dragon.
Thanks, John. Good morning, and thank you for joining the webinar. My name is Dragan Pejic, and I'm with the conventional oil and gas team at Alberta Environment and Protected Areas. What I would like to focus in this presentation would be mostly around streamlining the application process and kind of highlight of some of the improvements in that regard that were also made based on the feedback we received from you, the industry, which is really appreciated. And I can only encourage you to continue providing feedback to us. So one of the items that I like to highlight is that we have updated the applications for creation of the new aggregates, for amendments to the existing aggregates, and for the notifications in regards to them. There are 3 of them already published, and you can download them anytime and use it. The 4th one is coming this week. And one of the major things that we have accomplished here was to remove those macros. So it looks like that was a headache for many. So now they are just pure Excel-based applications. On this slide also, you're gonna have this presentation too, so you can have direct link to them. So let me talk first a little bit about the new aggregate facility application form. So on the submission tab, you will be asked for the name of your aggregate that you would like to call it, and then and that will be asked from you only once, not as previously on multiple occasions in the form. You will also select the year at which you would like to have this effective. And as a reminder, our program, tier aggregate program, runs for the whole calendar year. So regardless of at what point of time in the current year you apply for the tier program, you will be responsible for the whole year. On the, let's go to facilities tab that had some maybe slight modification, of course. You will be providing, well, this is actually pretty much what was before. You will select the name of a conventional oil and gas facility name, enter the NAICS codes, NAPS codes, and Petnex facility ID would be the next. Again, if you are do not have Petnex facility ID for the facility that you are enrolling, then let's say there is still drilling and completion going on, then you can leave that field blank. But we do ask you that in the statement section of the application, you clarify why there is nothing in this field. You will select your subtype of the facility, EPN number if applicable, GRGIP number, latitude and longitude of the facilities, and touch a boundary file for the facilities that are emitting more than 10,000 tons of CO2 per year. And of course, you will declare if you're owner or operator of the facility or AAR regulated one. On the statement certification, and not much change there, except that you will now see a date of the statement. So that will be kind of new for that. Adding facilities to existing aggregate. So the original application that we used before had both additions and removals in the same one, and it was a little bit confusing. So now we have split that application in two. If you like to add aggregates, add facilities to existing aggregate, there is one application, another one for removals. So on the submission tab of this application form, you would basically make sure that you select the correct aggregate ID that you are doing amendments for, and of course the year that this change is to be effective. On the facilities tab, you will put the name of the conventional oil and gas facility, its tier facility ID, Petrinks facility ID, and statement tab, you will have it signed by certifying official and select the date in the drop-down menu. These forms can be signed right here in the application. You would double-click this X button and a window will pop up to allow for signing. We have also instructions on the website how to overcome some of the issues that people were experiencing before. Feel free to refer to that. And if that still doesn't work, you are welcome to submit a PDF form of the signed applications, but in which case we ask you to provide every single tab on the application form, not just the statement of certification. Removing facilities from existing aggregate application form. So the submission tab is very similar to the, sorry, I was looking at different screenshot here for the adding facility to existing aggregate application form. So this would be basically all the fields that you see here are the same as for new aggregate facility application form. There is no difference there, but for the removing facility from existing aggregate, you would only be asked to provide three properties of the facilities: its name, facility ID, and Petrinks ID. Moving to aggregate notification form. So this form is to use for administrative changes to the aggregate. And these changes are all in the regulation under section 25, in which person responsible has to notify director about changing person responsible. And if the facility is exceeding 10,000 tons of CO2 per year, or if the facilities are decommissioned. This form is also enable you to kind of differentiate between change person responsible for the whole aggregate or for some only selected facilities. It will also enable you to replace the temporary facility IDs that were issued for the year in which you did not have the actual Petrinks ID. That would be, for example, case once those facilities start producing. So that this form would be also used for that. And then, of course, you can select either exceeding tons of CO2 or facility decommissioning. The input tab is pretty much the same as you saw it before on the previous application for additions of the facilities. One new field is previous facility ID. So this is where you would provide a facility ID in which we issued to you in our confirmation letter as a temporary one until you receive your Petrinks facility ID. Also, we're going to talk about it later, but just to remind again, if we enroll you on an aggregate program for a year in which you are only assigned a temporary facility ID, as you did not have Patrinex 1, that facility will be removed from your aggregate in the following year, right? So you need to reapply with Patrinex ID if you like to have it in the aggregate. What we would suggest once you receive our confirmation on regulation, to review that letter from us for accuracy at the earliest opportunity. So it does kind of provides for timely rectification of any errors or omissions, and we know that your time is valuable too. On the deadlines, considering that program is now in its third year and relatively mature, we will not have much flexibility in granting the deadline exceptions. So please be aware of them and try to fit within those deadlines. One thing that we frequently see is that the organizations apply to enroll a facility under aggregate the moment they become operator of record in Patronex. That's eligible request provided that facility is not in someone else's aggregate for that year. So we would suggest that when you acquire facilities from another organization, to check with them if that facility is already in their aggregate for the year, in which case, of course, it cannot be in your aggregate too, even though you are the operator of record for that year. So, but of course, you will be welcome to apply for that facility for the following year. And you will see in the slides that coming, lots of the deadline is on December 1. And we do ask you that you apply well ahead of those application deadlines, because our team is rather small, and then once those applications kind of get all at once, maybe a few days before the deadline, it makes for quite a delays to have them processed, and also it helps not to have John and Christina approving them on the Christmas Eve also. One of the things that I like to talk also is about splitting and amalgamation, and remind that an organization can have more than one aggregate, right? So you may want to use that tool sometimes if you see that your facility in the aggregate are kind of very diverse in sense of production profile, and then which will be very challenging to issue benchmark for those. So if you feel that you had facilities that actually should be in 2 or even 3 aggregates, feel free to apply for that. But have in mind that we're not going to change anything for the year in which you enrolled, in this case 2022. But if you like to have that aggregate split for 23, feel free to do so. In which case, you would, it's basically two-step process. You would first submit application to remove those facility from the okay, maybe wording is here and not quite there, but basically you would submit application to remove facilities from your existing aggregate. I think it should say existing aggregate, not existing aggregate application form. And then to have them removed for 2023 3 in this case, for example. And then you would submit a new aggregate facility application form to add those facilities into a new aggregate, the second one. Now, sometimes the situation when you would like to merge different aggregates. It could be a case of acquisitions in which you kind of determine that the cost of being in the program will be less. So if you if you combine 2 or 3 aggregates into one that you acquire. So what's required in that case would be that again, going back to the requirement under Section 25, the T regulation, that you submit the aggregate notification form and inform director that those facilities, and again, that's original person responsible that was in charge of the aggregate for the current year, for that year, basically informing the director that those facilities have changed person responsible. Also, consequently to that same original person responsible will submit removing facilities from the existing aggregate application form to remove those facilities from the acquired aggregate. Now, the last and final one is what the new person responsible for the aggregate would do, is to submit adding facility to the existing aggregate application form to add the facilities to the acquiring aggregate. So again, there is a little bit of work here for the original person responsible and some of the work responsibilities on the new person responsible to take care of that. End of the year facilities auto removal. So we will execute auto removal of facilities that fall in one of these 3 categories end of the year. Basically, the resulting facility listing will be effective January 1, 2023. So what are those facilities? So those are the ones for which the person responsible has changed. And it's not the same as the one that was registered on the tier for 2022. We will also remove facilities without pattern XID. So again, those are different types of drilling and completion facilities that are still under tier, but eventually they need to get their facility ID, Pattern's facility ID, and you are welcome to apply to have them back in 2023 back into the aggregate, or you can use that notification form and say, hey, yeah, this my my temporary ID I have for this facility has received this Pattern XID, and we will process that. And third category of the facilities will be those with invalid Pattern XIDs, if for any reasons there are some. As you could see here, some of these actions, even though we will conduct this auto removal by ourselves without need for application for it, we do encourage you actually to submit application just to make sure it's kind of double checking that that the record is up to date, that we are aware that what's happening on your side, on the facility side. So again, even though this is being done automatically, if possible, please submit application by itself to remove those facilities that you're not, for example, person responsible, and if they have invalid Pattern XID. So as for the deadlines, as you can see, all of them are kind of at the moment focused on December 1. So that would be the last, December 1, 2022. This year would be the last day for adding any facility to an existing aggregate for the current 2022 year. It's also the deadline for creating new aggregate facility for the next year. I'm sorry. And deadline also for removing a facility from existing aggregate for 23. So if you don't receive that application for removal, that facility will continue be under tier program for the next year, for the whole year, though, right? Even though, let's say, in spring, there is a different operator of record in Petanex, you will still be responsible for that facility for the whole 2023. And also, this is the deadline for revocation of an aggregate facility designation for the next year. How do you contact us? So basically, our website that I think you are very familiar with, this is the link, but we have new operators, and so it has a very actually good material, education material regarding the tier program, and we encourage you to go through that. This is our email that you can contact us with any questions. If you think though that it will be more productive and more efficient if you just talk on the phone, feel free to request a phone callback. Just send an email to ap.ghg and say, hey, we would like to, can we have a callback? And we will do it. And in case there is more people that you would like to have at the meeting, feel free to request Microsoft Teams meetings, and we will accommodate that too. At this point, I would like to pass it back to John for the question and answers, who can be either Alberta environment or ECCC related. Thank you.
Thank you, Dragan. Maybe I would also encourage folks, we do have quite a few questions that have come up that have already been answered. So maybe just take a quick scan through that section of the Q&A tool before you post your question, in case we've already covered one that's the same or similar to the question that you're looking for. So first question we have here: the date for adding a facility to an aggregate is prior to December 1st, 2022, but if we are bringing on facilities mid-December 2022, how do we capture these? So I think we would encourage you, if you're bringing on facilities, I guess through the month of December, and you know about that before December 1st, please do contact us, because we can likely accommodate that. If you, I guess, don't know about those facilities coming on, I guess we would encourage you to submit an application to add those for the 2023 year. Kind of a related question, I guess. So if I bring on a facility new for 2022 and mid-December 2022, and it has not been added to my aggregate before the December 1st deadline, will it be exposed to the federal fuel charge? Again, the short answer would be yes, but I guess we would encourage you to reach out to us if you know of sites that are going to come online through the course of December. Okay, so another question here: if we were to split or merge aggregates or facilities in an aggregate rather, would we now need to rebaseline the aggregate? If we do need to rebaseline the existing aggregate, are the previous years that we used for the baseline still relevant, or must we rebaseline to the 3 most recent years? So a couple of aspects here. So aggregates have the ability, I believe, before September 1st of a year, to submit a new benchmark application for their aggregates or to request for the review of a benchmark application. So, for example, for the 2023 compliance year, you would have until September 2023 to request a benchmark review or to submit a new benchmark application. We also, in the course of setting our benchmarks, do a rescaling if somebody hasn't incorporated the new sites in an application. We do some rescaling based on the impact of the new sites that were added to a benchmark. In general, we're open to have a bit of conversation, I think, around this question of 3 most recent years versus historic years. So where people are, for example, splitting aggregate that they had in the program in order to get a better consistency of production in the 2 new aggregates. I think we're happy to have a discussion with you about keeping the prior benchmark period. So question, earlier in the presentation, when CRA and ECCC have been presenting, I saw mention of flaring. Is flaring part of the tier program in respect of conventional oil and gas facilities in an aggregate? So for the 2022 compliance year, flaring is not included. This was a topic that was part of our tier engagement over the course of the summer, where we sought input on the expansion of coverage for aggregates to include flaring to be consistent with, for example, the OBPS and the federal fuel charge. So I guess look for some potential updates before the end of the year, as Kate indicated, in terms of potential updates or amendments to tier. Maybe I'll ask, maybe if Dragon wants to take this one, and I can read it. So if I add a facility for my 2022 by December 1st, 2021 deadline, that was planned for drilling and completions in the latter half of 2022 and will not have any production until 2023, so will likely not have a Petronex ID by the end of the year. It will likely be automatically removed from my aggregate list by AEP.
Yes, that's correct. So if you would like to receive a temporary facility ID for the 2022 to take to have a fuel charge exemption during drilling completion, and you don't receive an update that your record with us by December 1, we will remove that facility for 22 year. But I mean, you can submit anytime in 23, I mean, on January 1, if you wish to have that facility back to your aggregate with Petronex facility ID if you have it. Does that answer? Or?
Yeah, I think so. So again, in these kinds of situations, like we do intend to have to honor the facility, but we do need to hear from you, I think, in terms of the status of the Petronex ID and your further need to maintain a temporary placeholder. So please do, if that's your situation, do reach out to us, I think. So interesting question here. Are there currently, or will there be in future provisions available to account for approval of temporary facilities within an aggregate, specifically short-term non-producing locations that may be used and consume fuel to support a company's operations? For example, a company takes out a Crown RTF disposition at a point of water diversion, example, lake, river, borrow pit for pumps and water transfer lines to support a future frac. The RTF disposition is of a short-term nature, will never be a producing location, and therefore will never have a Alberta Petronex ID code. The operation that consumes fuel technically isn't defined facility under the tier aggregate, though it supports the tier aggregate. There can be implications for a scenario such as this as to whether the federal fuel charge should be applied to that specific fuel deliveries versus deliveries to defined facilities within the greater aggregate. So I guess the short answer is I think we're happy to figure out ways to support facilities that fit kind of our definition of conventional oil and gas facilities under the tier regulation. And I guess we're also happy to receive feedback over time if kind of our definition under tier of conventional oil and gas facilities aren't sufficiently inclusive. So I guess thanks for the question. And again, if there is an activity which is contemplated under our definition of conventional oil and gas facility, we're happy to talk to you to figure out how to support that, even if it doesn't or will not have a Petronex code. I'm going to defer one of these questions that's fairly purely on benchmarking, maybe. Okay, so another question, will venting or fugitive emissions be included in the tier aggregate program? Again, kind of going back to Kate's remarks, we expect to be able to get back to people with outcomes from our tier engagement and tier updates before the end of the year. Okay, and then I guess a thumbs up on the question or a seconding of the question about temporary facilities. So hopefully we covered that one. Okay, not seeing any open questions. We can give a couple seconds in case people do have additional questions for ourselves or Nancy. So Brian, please re-ask your question, maybe if we haven't covered it. Okay. Another question here.
Oh, sorry, just before you go there, John, sorry. Just to Brian, I did answer his question. I typed the answer in, so I don't know if there's another place he should look on his screen for it.
Yeah, he
I
may
can't
have
see it anymore.
yeah, it should appear in the Q&A tool for him.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, question here, and maybe given that we have a little bit of time, maybe we can entertain a couple of questions on baselining. Are baselining applications still required to be completed by industry, or given all the changes to the regs, future inclusion of other emission sources, etc.? Does AEP now automatically at end of year for COG aggregates? So it's a good question. We do have, in general, I think, some default approaches for setting benchmarks and updating benchmarks. So we do have, I think, pathways. If people haven't submitted a benchmark application, we are always happy to receive benchmark applications from aggregates. And sorry, there was one other question that I had maybe set aside that we can have time to revisit. Can an operator merge existing aggregates with different benchmark units? And if so, how is the benchmark determined? So I think in general, we wouldn't likely encourage the merging of aggregates with different benchmark units. If those benchmark units are representative and working well for the individual aggregates, it does create a challenge for us to create a new representative benchmark unit if you merge those two aggregates. So I guess if you're considering that, would suggest to reach out to us maybe before requesting that merger. Question, will all the questions and answers be published? I think we'll have to consult with our CRA and ECCC colleagues on that one. And if we do publish them, they'll be available on our website. Dragon, maybe a question for you about ETS system and its use to submit the application forms.
Right. And thanks for the question, actually. Yes, the only way how you can submit application to us is through ETS, electronic transfer system. We became aware of many advantages to it and actually streamlines the applications greatly. And that's the only way that we accept applications. If you do have issues with that, and actually we don't hear about those lately, but if you do, contact first ETS help desk, please. And if that doesn't work, feel free to contact us directly and we will work with you on that. But at the end of the day, the application has to come through ETS.
Okay, we've got a somewhat persistent but off-topic question on credit usage limits. So on that one, I guess I would just say that was an area of consultation under our tier engagement. So I guess stay tuned for updated regulation and connection back to stakeholders in the before the year end on any amendments that came out of the tier engagement. Okay, not seeing any other questions. Would very much like to thank everybody for their participation in today's webinar, and especially, I guess, to our federal colleagues for presenting today. I guess, as mentioned, if your question wasn't answered, please do reach out to us by email. The AEP slide deck for certain will be made accessible, and we expect also probably the recording of our provincial portions of the webinar. We do have a request on one last clarification. So again, really the crux of the question is around timing. So we do encourage folks to update your tier aggregate lists as soon as possible through the course of the year. So if you're bringing on new sites or new facilities, we do encourage you to add those to your aggregate as soon as you can through the course of the year. Okay. Thank you all very much, and we appreciate your participation today. And I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future. Take care.